Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in the United States on a critical mission to rally support for his victory plan aimed at ending the war with Russia. During his visit, Zelensky will meet with key U.S. leaders, including President Joe Biden, and attend sessions at the United Nations General Assembly to advocate for increased military aid and strategic support. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss the implication of this visit and the broader geopolitical landscape is Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Post. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening.
Zelensky's visit to the United States have been described as crucial. What are the main objectives that he hopes to achieve, and how significant is this trip for Ukraine's war effort?
Look, Ukraine has no time to waste, and it cannot afford to waste until the beginning of next year, when the election results are decided and a new president is sworn in the United States. So he is there to plead and to persuade President Biden not to wait until his successor takes office, but to give the go-ahead for Ukraine to use Western arms to strike deep into Russia, where the bases are located from which the Russians attack Ukraine. So it's not to attack Russia to gain territory. It's a defensive measure to prevent Russia from its daily onslaughts, in a sense to close the skies and to push the Russians back out of Ukraine because of the lack of proper logistical support. Obviously, he realizes that it's not so much the UN that's so important in his speech there on Wednesday, but getting through to Biden himself, giving Biden the chance to be remembered as a president that made a difference in his last weeks in office, in the standoff with Russia and leadership role for Europe and the Western world, and to meet with Harris and to meet with Trump and to get the ball rolling and not to delay any further. So it's a critical moment, if you want, for Ukraine. And he realizes that both America is preoccupied with internal issues, economic, immigration, etc., and that in Europe there's a fair amount of Ukraine fatigue. But this is a critical moment for Ukraine. Winter is coming in, and Ukraine has to sort of make that decisive breakthrough in this war of attrition, the stalemate on the front, and to get the momentum back on not only for Ukraine but for the West, as it were.
Right, like you mentioned, every day, even every hour, is very crucial and very critical for Ukraine at the moment. Now, recently, there's a piece published by Political saying that since the presidential candidate have switched in the Democratic Party side, there's actually a little bit of slowdown when it comes to the aid in Ukraine, because some of the previously mentioned as kind of Trump-proofing policies have been put on hold due to the fact that Harris is doing better than Biden in the polls, and they don't feel that urgency anymore to quote-unquote Trump-proof the situation in Ukraine. Is that something that's also being observed on the ground?
To an extent. I mean, the Americans have promised by the end of this month to, again, give another tranche of important aid, financial aid going to military supplies. You know, there is continuity in that support. But the key element here is, look, the key question, let's be frank. Is there a Biden strategy, a Washington strategy, and read into that a coherent Western strategy to win this war? Is it simply a question of holding the Russians in place where they are, not allowing them to move any further into Ukraine? Is it a question of containment, or is it a question of a strategy for victory? And victory, let's be frank about it. It's not just victory on the battlefield, setbacks for the Russians. It's victory within Russia itself. I mean, is there a Western strategy that Zelensky is pleading for not just in terms of weapons, not just in terms of financial support, but the decisiveness to get Russia to implode, as it were, to achieve mindset changes within Russia, regime change, to be very frank. And there hasn't been any sign that there is a coherent policy and agreement to achieve this, rather to hold the Russians back, to hold things in place, but not to aggravate the situation, not to exacerbate, not to escalate is the key word. And I think that Zelensky's mission is to say, look, it's now or never. If you don't do it now, it's going to cost you even more, and it's going to cost us even more in terms of lives. So let's do it together now while we have a chance. Let's forget about the red lines that Putin every week or every second week imbibes and refers to. Let's do the job. Let's push the Russians back, and let's get the Russian population to think about, is it worth it? What have we achieved? We were promised that Kyiv would be taken in 3 days. Here we are 3 years later.
Right, like you mentioned, it is very important to figure out whether the West have the strategy as well as the political will to help Ukraine achieve that victory. So when it comes to Zelensky's victory plan, do you think that there's anything concrete in there that's persuasive enough to perhaps move that needle a little bit towards Ukraine's favor?
Look, there's nothing mystical in this. People are speculating. We don't know the details, etc. It's very simple. Get the Russians out of Ukraine, get security guarantees for Ukraine in the sense of membership of the EU and NATO. That's the bottom line, territorial integrity. If you don't do that, you will have a simmering conflict, perhaps disguised as a frozen one, and the conflict with Russia will go on for years and years and years, with a vengeful Russia, which will think that it was, cheated in its ambitions to restore order as it sees fit in its backyard. So I think it's, the challenge for Zelensky is to return to the skills he had in the first year as an orator, as a PR person, as an actor, and to persuade the West in the UN, but particularly in the US, do it now. It's in your interest. It's not just about Ukraine.
Right, you mentioned something very crucial there, the simmering conflict within Russia and its population itself. Do you think that if there's any way that Ukraine can achieve victory without significant pushback, or do you think what you mentioned, like a regime change or even something nothing short of a total victory is required?
Look, I think it's naive to think that victory will come from victory on the battlefield. Yes, with Western help and long-distance weapons, Russia can be pushed back. But victory to come needs a change in the mindset and regime within Russia. The Russian population has to realize that this is a game loser, that this bravado about we Russians are special, we can do what we want, the West has to take us so seriously because we have nuclear weapons, etc. The Russian army has been shown to be much weaker than it's purported to be. The Russian population, the latest polls are showing that slowly but surely there is great dissatisfaction with the war. It's not simply the economic costs that is hitting the top, but it's the losses. It's the losses in men and in, many. You have to realize that many of these soldiers that are sent out there and paid good wages on paper, they disappear. Their bodies are never brought back because the government doesn't want to pay for the families. And this is becoming a huge problem within Russian society. Mothers are beginning to protest, as we saw during the Afghan war. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen overnight, but in this war of attrition, which it's become, if there's not a decisive move from the West to make a difference and to carry the fight into Russia without actually attacking Moscow and St. Petersburg directly, but saying, look, here's some of the treatment that you're meting out to the Ukrainians, and are you prepared to live with this for the longer term? And that is the question that they will have to face. So, as I repeat, for for the second or third time. It's not a question of just victory on the battlefield. It's a question of changing mindsets and this imperialistic, chauvinistic, gung-ho attitude that many Russians have been led to accept through the propaganda that they get from the state media.
Right, so like you mentioned, it's not just a battlefield that is of the essence here. There's also the whole mentality and the whole Russian government that might need to be changed in order for Ukraine to achieve actual victory. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you for watching this edition of World News Tonight. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.